Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the podium the President of the Fund for American Studies, Roger Reen.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at the TFAS Journalism Awards dinner. We appreciate you being here tonight, and we're grateful for the generous support you've given us for our journalism programs. Tonight, we introduce a new contingent of Robert Novak Journalism Fellows and our 5th annual Joseph Rago Fellow for Excellence in Journalism. I'm confident you will be as impressed as I am with this new group of young journalists. Tonight, Bob Novak and Joe Rago are front and center in our hearts and in our minds. In a piece I wrote about Joe Rago for National Review on the 5th anniversary of his passing this summer, I noted that friends considered one of Joe's greatest attributes to be his wry optimism in the face of despair. Joe believed that life would never be perfect, but it is still worth trying to make things better. He also recognized that we must continue to nourish important American institutions, including journalism, despite its flaws. That side of Joe is important to remember, particularly at a time when it is easy to despair. With war in Europe, reckless government spending, the destructive impact of inflation, our country divided over 2 visions of our Constitution. Add to that widespread economic illiteracy and a lack of civic education among the rising generation, there's certainly much to despair about. I imagine Joe, if he were here, would remind us that we have a great legacy upon which to build for the future. We have the examples of great journalists to inspire us, including Bob Novak, Joe Rago, Bob Bartley, Clark Mollenhoff, and many others. At TFAS, we're certainly encouraged that so many eager young minds come to us seeking to learn economics, to gain an appreciation of America's great political traditions and our Constitution, and to prepare for careers in journalism, public policy, international affairs, politics, and other important professions. TFAS reaches young people around the globe, from high school and college students, law students, and young professionals early in their careers, with programs in Prague, Santiago, Chile, Guatemala, Washington, D.C., and on dozens of other college campuses in the U.S., TFAS is reaching the rising generation. We are producing courageous leaders who will work to rebuild the foundations of a free and prosperous society with limited government and the rule of law. These courageous leaders will ensure that the greatest economic system in human history, the only economic system consistent with fundamental moral principles, the only system that empowers humans to flourish, will not perish. The timing of this dinner couldn't be better. Today's a great day for mankind. In fact, it's deserving of a toast. I learned this courtesy of a Bill McGurn column published, I think, in October. On this very day, Bill told us, November 15th, sometime early this morning, in fact, we welcomed the 8 billionth person to our planet. This population growth would not have been possible were it not for rising life expectancies, falling infant mortality, international commerce, and immense gains to human productivity. It's something to rejoice. We owe all of this to the abundance of capitalism, liberal values, commerce and markets, the rule of law, and the culture of liberty. So tonight, let's celebrate. Let's celebrate Bill McGurn, Let's celebrate the latest group of Robert Novak and Joe Rago Fellows. Let's celebrate the remarkable courage of Jimmy Lai and those like him who are willing to sacrifice so very much, to pay such a high personal price to stand up to tyranny and uphold the values of life, liberty, and human flourishing. Before we go any further, I would like to ask those in the room who have participated in a TFAS program, FTE program, been a Novak Fellow, a Rago Fellow, to please stand just so we can see who you are. So would alumni and fellows please stand. Thank you. You'll be hearing from Paul and Nancy Rago later this evening, two people we've come to love and respect so much, who we work with to carry on our legacy. It's wonderful to be here with you tonight. Paul, Nancy Rago, Grace Rago, and the rest of your family. It is fitting that we have a Dartmouth College graduate, the Reverend Gerald Murray, to offer our invocation this evening. Reverend Murray is pastor of Holy Family Church here in Manhattan. He's the author of a book, Calming the Storm, Navigating the Crisis Facing Catholic Church and Society. Please prepare yourself for an invocation by Reverend Murray. Thank you.
Now, before I speak, I'll just say I'm so pleased to know that Joe Rago's parents are here. I was involved in the foundation of the Dartmouth Review, which produced so many wonderful writers, and for some reason they all seem to go to the Wall Street Journal, where they did a lot of good and continue to do a lot of good. So God bless his memory and his influence, may it continue. St. Paul writes in Galatians 5:13, "For you were called to freedom, brethren, only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love be servants of one another. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word, you shall love your neighbor as yourself." Freedom and love are the unifying themes of our awards dinner this evening, as we honor Jimmy Lai and Bill McGurn. Both men have displayed in their careers love for their fellow man by using their talents and hard work to defend their fellow man's right to be free from all injustice, fraud, and cruelty imposed by those holding public authority. In the cases of both men, it is their unwavering conviction that all rights come from God. No earthly power can rightly deprive us of that freedom to which we are called by God. To defend that freedom is to show true love. Freedom allows us all to fulfill our duties and to flourish in a society where all are treated fairly. Bill McGurn is with us tonight. Jimmy Lai is not. He is in jail. He suffers for exercising what we in the free world take for granted, the right to say in public things that upset those in charge. We honor his sacrificial love, and we honor his godfather, Bill McGurn, who has championed Jimmy Lai's cause with unrelenting steadfastness. Dictators do not like to be contradicted. They like to be obeyed. Jimmy Lai and Bill McGurn stand for the eternal truth that God has made us for freedom. Those who deny that truth need to be contradicted. Love of neighbor requires that courageous men and women who wield the power of the pen defend our God-given right to speak the truth, come what may. Let us pray. We ask God's blessing this evening upon Jimmy Lai and Bill McGurn. May their integrity and courage inspire in all a renewed effort to love our neighbor by speaking the truth. Bless, O Lord, our fellowship this evening, and this food which we receive from thy bounty, you who live and reign forever and ever. Amen.
Now, please welcome to the podium Ryan Wolf, Manager of Continuing Education Programs at the Fund for American Studies.
Good evening, everyone. I'm excited to get tonight started by introducing you to this year's class of Robert Novak Journalism Fellows. This prestigious year-long program provides grant funding and expense assistance to support early career writers in their pursuit of journalistic projects they would otherwise be unable to research and report. Robert Novak provided the inspiration for this program in 1994 to nurture a new generation of responsible and courageous journalists. The program was renamed in Mr. Novak's honor following his passing in 2009. Today, the Novak program has awarded over 150 fellowships to promising young journalists who are climbing the ranks as groundbreaking reporters, editors, editorial page writers, columnists, and authors. This year's cohort consists of reporters and writers from Reason, National Review, The Wall Street Journal, The American Conservative, The Washington Free Beacon, and Base Politics. They have already begun working on their projects, reporting on important topics like deinstitutionalization, student debt, and immigration. So let's welcome the 2022-2023 class of Robert Novak Journalism Fellows to the stage to tell you about their work.
Hello, my name is Billy Binion. I'll start by saying that there's a non-zero chance that someone in this room has trolled me for that on Twitter, where I've been told more than once that it sounds like I stole my name from a bad Stan Lee movie. I would like to clarify it is my real name. Thank you, Mom. I'm sitting over there. I'm an associate editor at Reason magazine, where I primarily cover criminal justice. I like to say I was writing about qualified immunity before it was cool. And in that vein, one of the things that has really disturbed me over the several years that I've been reporting is just how hard it is to hold government officials accountable when they violate your constitutional rights. A police officer can steal from you. A prosecutor can fabricate evidence against you and wrongly incarcerate you. A university official can violate your free speech rights. And there's essentially nothing you can do to hold them to account, thanks to a slew of made-up legal doctrines that the Supreme Court pulled out of thin air. But nothing epitomized this problem more to me than a case I came across recently, concerning a woman who was brutally raped by a prison guard in Louisiana and a rogue district attorney who did everything in his power to sabotage her case against that state employee. Despite a prominent conservative judge acknowledging that the case was grotesque, the victim tried to sue and predictably failed, thanks to the absolute immunity afforded to prosecutors. But the thing that really caught my eye about this case was who the victim's lawyer was. It was Ken Starr, who told me before he died that holding rogue government officials accountable is, quote, ultimately about the rule of law and the constitution of democracy. I have to say I agree. My project will further explore these various roadblocks, qualified immunity, absolute immunity, and the Monell Doctrine, as well as the ways in which the government is unaccountable when it's trying to hold us accountable, like with civil forfeiture, which is essentially legalized larceny. And I'd like to end with this. The first thing that anyone said to me in this interview came from Mr. Alfred Regnery, who I don't believe is here tonight. But he started the interview by telling me that he is the chairman of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund, which often invokes qualified immunity to defend officers accused of misconduct, which I will say is a very intimidating way to start a conversation about why we should abolish qualified immunity. But I have thought about that a lot since being offered this award, because I think it so embodies the spirit that should be at the center of every political movement. People who are willing to say, you know, I'm skeptical of your argument, or maybe I just disagree outright. But instead of dismissing you, I am going to give you the resources to flesh out your argument in full. Because I think so many of us know that we're all the richer when we have those debates. And that's especially true in a media landscape that seems to value ideological conformity as virtue. But I don't think that is the spirit at the Fund for American Studies, because if that were the case, to be honest, I don't think I'd have the opportunity to be here tonight. So with that, I would like to thank the panelists and everyone at the Fund for American Studies for giving me the chance to make the case that if you believe in the Constitution, if you believe in responsible and accountable government, and most importantly, if you believe in the rule of law, then you must believe that those who enforce it should not be above it. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I was told I get 2 minutes, and as a runner, I always have this Timex on. So I just decided, I'm going to rigorously enforce this. My name is Jack Butler. I'm the submissions editor at National Review Online, also a media fellow at the Institute for Human Ecology, and now a Novak fellow. So the point of the Novak Fellowship, among the many points of it, is to identify promising young journalists and to promote the principles of a free society. And when people think about that, they probably don't think about running very much. But it is the contention of my effort, for which I am grateful to TFAS and everyone involved with it for considering me worthy, to suss out the connections between the principles and the virtues that are inherent in physical activity and recreation and those that are essential to sustaining a free society. Because I think they're more connected than people usually think they are. So I just think of this as a runner, for example. You have to get up, if you're taking the pursuit seriously, you have to get up every morning. You have to impose this discipline on yourself. In a lot of situations, you have a team to do it with you, but not all the time. And I think these are things, these virtues of self-denial, I think that these are essential complements to the freedom that we're given as our birthright as Americans and the freedom for which TFAS stands. And I think these things go together. And I think what has been revealed with recent events is that there is not an articulation of a worldview that connects these things as well as they could be. I think the recent COVID pandemic has revealed this, that our values about such things are out of whack. And I intend to explore these things and to articulate a vision that I think already has a lot of practitioners out there who may not consciously be aware that they're doing it. And so I am grateful to TFAS for enabling me to do this. And I'm just very happy to be here, and I hope to rise to the occasion of and be worthy of this honor that I've received. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is John Hirschauer. I am assistant editor at the American Conservative in Washington. I'm very grateful to everyone for the opportunity to be here. My project is called The Faces of Deinstitutionalization. States across the country in the late 19th and early 20th century built a network of what were called state schools for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And there's a lot of human tragedy bound up in these facilities. Parents would drop their children off when they were 5, 6 years old, and they'd live out their entire natural lives on, huge physical plants in the rural part of the state, shunted away from society. And there was a ton of abuse that occurred in a lot of these facilities, notably Willowbrook State School, the Geraldo Rivera expose that's famous to a lot of people. I had one of these places in my hometown about a mile from where I grew up. And I had always been involved with the special education program at my public high school, and it seemed natural to me to go and to see what the facility was like. And it's exactly like the stereotypes and the caricatures. It's set on 1,400 acres. There are these huge brick Victorian buildings. It's the caricature of a mental institution. And I went in to these huge imposing buildings, and I was amazed by what I saw. It was not what I expected. It was nothing like I had seen in the special education classrooms where I had volunteered previously. There were people in beds 24 hours a day, intubated. There were people with severely violent behaviors who were wearing helmets because they would bang their heads against the wall and would thrash and had all sorts of behaviors that required the sort of protection that an institutional environment can provide. And I quickly learned that not only was this place medically appropriate for the people who lived there, but it was also a community in a way that I had never fully appreciated from the outside. That the men and women who lived there, many of whom lived there for 40, 50, 60 years, were a community unto themselves. They had their own mail system. They'd go door to door. And I was kind of taken aback that a place that was so derided by disability rights advocates as being segregated in a warehouse and something that needs to close was a place of such warmth and compassion and humanity. And it sparked me to look around the country to other places like this that were still open, that were fighting disability rights advocates who said these places are places of the past and they need to close, and there's a sort of moral imperative to close these places. And I endeavored, and I will endeavor with the Novak Project, to report on that. And I'll wrap up with an anecdote which I hope will convince you of the moral significance of these places and these people. In 2019, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania announced that it was going to be closing 2 of its remaining 4 state institutions for people with mental retardation, or what was called mental retardation, now developmental disabilities. And when the Department of Human Services announced that they were going to be closing the facility, the department said, "We are making this move to better recognize the inherent worth and dignity of the residents being served at these centers." In other words, they and their families had voluntarily chosen to live there, but we, the Department of Human Services in Pennsylvania, better understand their dignity than their own parents. And all sorts of disability rights advocates celebrated the decision. And the end of the closure comes this month. They announced it in 2019, and the closure comes this month. And a woman named Alma from Polk State Center, which had been open for 100 years, was one of the last to leave Polk. And she cried for a whole week before she left. And the staff drove her 4 hours across the Commonwealth to a new location. They dropped her off. And as they were walking away, Alma said to them, "Please give me another chance." So I hope to tell the story of people like Alma, who otherwise would have, not to valorize what I'm doing, but to just consider the moral significance of what she has to say. I want to try to be an adequate voice for it, and I'm thankful to the Novak Fellowship for giving me that opportunity. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Madeline Cairns. I'm a staff writer at National Review and a visiting fellow at the Independent Women's Forum. My project is called Sex Rejected: How America Spawned the Transgender Contagion. I bet if 20 years ago someone had told you that by the year 2022 we would be having a national debate about whether men should be in women's sports or whether children should be transsexuals, you'd probably think that person was being hysterical. And yet that is where we are. That is the new liberal consensus asserted by Hollywood and by much of the Democratic Party. In fact, 2 weeks ago, the President of the United States said that it would be immoral for state lawmakers to prohibit the medicalized gender experiments on children. There's been much discussion about how this ideology harms women and girls and the various ideological claims, but my project is going to focus on a more fundamental question of how did we get here? Why here and why now? And I think that this is not merely about the rejection of anatomical sex, but about how we encourage the generation to embrace unreality. So I'm very grateful to the Fund for American Studies and the Selection Committee for this opportunity. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Brad Palumbo. I'm an independent journalist and co-founder of the media nonprofit-based Politics, and now a Novak Fellow. My fellowship project will focus on something you guys might have seen a headline or two about in the last few weeks: the student debt crisis and the push for student debt cancellation. And I thought I'd start by sharing with you guys the results of a recent survey of 1,200 prospective and likely recipients of President Biden's student debt relief. 52% said they plan to spend the money on new clothes. 28% admitted to pollsters that they plan to spend the money on alcohol. 27% admitted that they plan to purchase drugs. And 26% said they plan to gamble more with the money that they have. So you got to give the kids credit for their candor. But in my project, I will humbly suggest this is not the best use of our taxpayer dollars, and that the student debt crisis, as it is commonly asserted, is both overblown and fails to diagnose the real roots of the problem of high college costs, which are rooted in big government interventions and meddling, and a culture on campus of administrative bloat. And so I think this is a really important issue. If we don't want our tax dollars to be wasted by the billions, we need to make an assertive case against this and offer alternative solutions. And so I'm very grateful to the Fund for American Studies for the ability to attempt to do just that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Joe Simonson, and I'm a senior investigative reporter at the Washington Free Beacon in Washington, D.C. And I just want to reiterate, it is such an honor to be up here tonight. I feel as though the Novak Fellowship is a rite of passage for anyone dedicated to rigorous conservative journalism. In other words, I'm finally having my bar mitzvah at age 29, and I guess we learned the secret handshake after dinner. My project is entitled Immigration Politics in a New America, a topic of fascination by academics, politicians, and voters for centuries. I hope to examine what immigration policy and public sentiment about immigration will look like in the coming decade and beyond. I'm sure everyone in this room has heard at least once that the GOP is making immense inroads with minority and particularly immigrant communities. And there is ample evidence to support that case. I am also, however, concerned the United States is teetering on seeing entrenched ethnic voting habits similar to what occurred in the early and middle of the 20th century. Whether the GOP can break those entrenched habits will decide how recognizable this country is in 10, 20, or 30 years. There is no going back, of course, to a largely homogeneous country, but hopefully we can begin to understand what our shared future will look like. Thank you again for this opportunity.
Hi there. My name is Kate Batchelder Odell. I'm a member of the Wall Street Journal's editorial board. I'm also a mother of 2 young boys and a wife to a Navy pilot, which was the original spark for my project. My project is about the decline in American military power since the end of the Cold War. The United States military is the oldest, smallest, and least ready it has been in 7 decades. This comes at a particularly dangerous moment as the threat from China increases. So my project will focus on 3 things. The first is equipment. The U.S. Navy is half the size it was during the Cold War, and we simply do not have enough ships and aircraft to cover the ground that we are asked to cover every day. The second is about personnel. The U.S. military is no longer an attractive career option for talented young Americans. And I am concerned about that because one of America's enduring advantages is producing the kind of risk takers and innovative thinkers who can win wars. The third element of the project is about, aims to be somewhat heterodox in calling for increased defense spending that is paired with an aggressive reform effort to contain spending on retirees, healthcare costs, and also to reform an antiquated system for buying and developing equipment. So this is it's a project close to my heart, and it comes as Americans are watching war in Europe and starting to question what the world might look like in 10 or 15 years. So I'm so grateful for the Novak Fellowship and for TFAS funding this project at such an important inflection point. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, the program will resume shortly. Please continue to enjoy your meal. And now, please direct your attention to the stage and welcome Ben Riley, Managing Editor of the New Criterion.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Riley, and I'm Managing Editor of the New Criterion. Thank you to Roger Ream and everyone at Fund for American Studies for organizing such a wonderful, meaningful dinner tonight. For those who don't know me, I was a friend and fraternity brother of Joe Rago's, as well as a colleague. I had the good fortune to edit Joe's work when he wrote for the New Criterion. I'm also the chairman of the board of the Dartmouth Review, on which Joe served for years before his death. Good fortune is how I think of my having known Joe. How fortunate I was, how fortunate we all were to have known such a dynamic personality, such a brilliant mind, and such a hilarious person. He was publicly known for the trenchance of his writing, his ability to get to the heart of an issue in just a few considered words. But what underlay that ability was the private side of Joe. It's the dogged work that allowed him to write such persuasive columns. He always viewed himself as a journalist, appropriate for an evening like tonight, not a pundit. He relished calling sources, reading legislation, and ultimately learning as much as he could before pronouncing on this issue or that. He understood that to put something into print was a sacred act, not one to be taken lightly. He was a history major at Dartmouth. Posterity mattered. He approached his entire life journalistically from the incessant picture taking. In the nearly 10 years that I knew him, he had moved from disposable cameras to pocket digitals, to iPhones, to the natural inquisitiveness that was never at rest. That curiosity could lead him to unlikely places. Our lunch at the Trump Grill, research for a column, was a particularly madcap example. But a seemingly guileless approach was really a subtle way to get at a story from multiple angles. Every detail was relevant to Joe, and his greatest skill, and I hesitate to name one because his talents were pretty wide, may have been his ability to distill so much learning into such succinct statements. That he did so with a splendid prose style, seriously learned but never ever self-serious, was all to the reader's benefit. As the Pulitzer Prize Committee said in his 2011 award, Joe was responsible for well-crafted, against-the-grain editorials challenging the healthcare reform advocated by President Obama. That was just the start of what he would have gone on to do. But we can take some small comfort in knowing that, thanks to the support of the Rago family, the Fund for American Studies, the generous donors here tonight, and the Wall Street Journal, that the next generation of serious journalists has a chance to complete some of the work that Joe started. Now, please welcome Joe's father, Paul Rago, to introduce the recipient of the
Thank you, Ben, for those stirring words. Appreciate them very much. This evening, we gather to celebrate ideas, the courage of Jimmy Lai, the integrity of Bill McGurn, the brilliance of our Novak and Rago Fellows, and the optimism of Robert Novak and Joe Rago, and also the pursuit of truth that fuels journalism. Let me begin by thanking TFAS, the Wall Street Journal, all the benefactors and donors. Your generosity is inspiring as it is impressive. I welcome the members of my family who have traveled far, my wife, Nancy, daughter Grace, and all of my family seated up there. Thank you for your tribute to Joe as well, Ben. It's very much heartfelt and well appreciated, and thank you to all his classmates and colleagues here tonight. Congratulate Jimmy Lai, Bill McGurn, and the Novak awardees, especially Kate Batchelder Odell, a colleague and friend of Joe's. I stand in awe of your accomplishments. But tonight, I want to give you a little background on the selection process for the Rago Fellowship. At the interview, you may be asked who you follow in the journal, the books you've been reading, or who your favorite author is. There are no right or wrong answers. William Buckley might be a good answer. Daniel Steele might not. This question is motivated by the importance of books as cultivators of the mind and predictors of writing ability. Books are the antithesis of a tweet. As Peter Thiel noted, we wanted flying cars, and instead we got 140 characters. So, Joe tolerated tweets, but loved books. His library of over 4,000 books included innumerable books on the healthcare, nearly everything written by William Buckley, the complete works of Oliver Wendell Holmes, Daniel Webster, and of course something from nearly every history professor at Dartmouth. But among these 4,000 books was an apparent stowaway, a book by Daniel Steele. So perhaps this is not surprising. You know, it has been said that in the 1750s version of Beauty and the Beast was John Adams' favorite book. Our country would not have been conceived nor endured without the literacy of our founding fathers. John Adams authorized the Library of Congress a mere 9 years after the Bill of Rights was ratified. Jefferson's library of 6,000 books inoculated its initial collection. Over the past 5 years, we've been very fortunate to be inoculated by an exceptional group of Rago Fellows, many of whom are here tonight. Elliot Kaufman, the first Rago Fellow, is now the letters editor of the journal. Alessandra Bocchi now freelances in Europe. Faith Bottom has been hired full-time at the journal. And Matthew Taylor King, stolen by Henry Kissinger to contribute on his book on leadership, was commissioned as an ensign in the Navy this past summer. Collectively, they have kept Joe's spirit alive. Our latest Rago Fellow is Carine Hajjar. She has demonstrated the power of commitment. A graduate of Harvard, she wrote a column for the Crimson entitled Always at Odds, a name Joe surely would have liked. Her writing is well reasoned and supported by facts. She does, as Paul Jagot recommends, tell the readers something they didn't know before. In her spare time, she wrote for the National Review and interned for Senator Tom Cotton. She has a keen sense of adventure, independence, and confidence. After graduation, she was awarded a fellowship by Harvard to visit Europe's convents and monasteries. She completed the Camino de Santiago for good measure. In 2 short months with the journal, she has had 3 byline articles, including articles on the effects of immigration in New York and Hispanic voters in Nevada. Carine is joined tonight here by her very proud parents, John and Astrid, and members of her family and friends. With no further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our newest Rago Fellow, Carine Hajjar. Carine, the floor is yours.
In a 2004 piece for the Dartmouth Review titled "Shut Up, I Explained," Joe Rago wrote about a particularly disturbing item in the review's office, a student activist award. He wrote the distinction was mortifying, not least of all for the association with a thing as unsavory as activism. He was arguing against the efforts of a conservative activist to mandate intellectual diversity in university faculties. Much like Jimmy Lai, Joe did not want a discourse moderated from on high. He warned against an insidious type of activism, the kind that starts with an assertion of what is right or wrong, that imposes morality. But for Joe, the job of a journalist was to tell readers what is, to make right or wrong obvious. The best stories tell themselves, and Joe had a knack for finding them. He was an artist in the obvious, backed by profound research, a rare intelligence, and a sharp wit that commanded the attention of those that agreed with him and those that did not. When he won a Pulitzer Prize for his editorials on the Affordable Care Act, the judges wrote that no matter where you fall on the debate of health care reform, Joe's editorials were impossible to ignore. So Joe knew that sometimes the job of a journalist is serious work, to point out these flaws, to challenge weak policy. But broadcasting the obvious didn't always have to be serious. Real life, after all, is absurd. Reality Joe relished with delight. In a 2016 piece, Joe wrote about a certain braggadocious presidential candidate and his self-branded business empire. He chipped away at the bravado, not by verbal thrashing or pious sermon, but by using the most obvious story of all, customer reviews. 26,000 of them, to be exact. And he said he did this in his free time. He even valiantly sampled some of the items, as was mentioned before, at the Trump Grill, such as the Trump Red Wine Blend, writing that the esophageal burns speak for themselves. So he balanced his wit with hard work. Commenting on his research for the piece, Joe wrote, "It has been slow, bleary-eyed scut work, trust me. And remember, kids, this is what happens if you go into journalism." Kids, Joe Rago is an example of what should happen when you go into journalism. Getting the story right, painting reality, whether figuratively or even literally hard to swallow, is what we are called to do. Joe didn't want the blind, moralistic assertions of the activist. He wanted the joyful, terrible, divisive, unifying reality of it all. He wanted, as he wrote so wisely as a junior in college, a contest of ideas. I'll work hard to show my gratitude to Joe's parents, Nancy and Paul, for the privilege of participating in their son's legacy at the nation's best venue for such a contest. And to Paul Gigot and James Toronto and everyone at the Wall Street Journal editorial board, thank you for welcoming me and for your kind support. To Roger Ream and the team at TFAS, thank you for the opportunity and for your efforts to uphold the values of personal liberties and free expression that allowed Joe's beloved contest to flourish. I promise to do the scut work Joe Rago so loved, not to tell readers what to think, but to show them. Thank you.
Now, please turn your attention to the video screens for a short video about Jimmy Lai, tonight's recipient of the Kenneth Tomlinson Award for Courageous Journalism.
The number one eyesore for Beijing was always Apple Daily.
Sometimes you need people to kick your ass in business. I was one of the very few guys who was very controversial, who was very outspoken.
Living in the truth is an effective tool against totalitarian power. Speaking truth to power is something that powerful dictatorships are terrified by.
And I think Jimmy understood that. That's why he started the paper, that's why he kept it, that's why he made it into essentially a part of the movement.
Everybody was so taken out, so scared, that they went into self-censorship to avoid offending the communists.
So many businessmen keep quiet because they have investments in China. So Hong Kong people always have a soft spot for a guy willing to speak out as Jimmy does.
Sit around the table with Jimmy Lai. His ability to get to the core of an issue was just phenomenal.
And actually, he gave me the first advice. He said, you know what, if you are fighting for the free market, if you're fighting for freedom, be prepared to be very lonely.
It was a cool thing to work for the Apple Daily because you can do the stories that you like, that you can do investigative journalism.
I promise that I only criticize what they do after they publish it, so there's no censor.
The journalists of Apple Daily have always been on the front lines, trying to report the truth, trying to document the history.
Apple Daily is sharing a different voice. It stands for an option, I think, an alternative.
The existence of Apple Daily really tells that Hong Kong is special because you can not find a newspaper just like Apple Daily in mainland China.
I was thrilled by the idea that, I can be part of the institution that is delivering freedom.
If I deliver information, I'm in the business of delivering liberty.
Standing up for people's rights in Hong Kong and by denouncing Chinese communism and its opposition to the rule of law and democracy.
I believe that if I do the right thing, the strength will come.
I don't know whether he was perfect or not. All I know, he was extremely brave and stood up for all the sort of things which those of us who live in liberal democracies sometimes take for granted.
Presenting tonight's Kenneth Tomlinson Award for Courageous Journalism is Paul Jago, editorial page editor and vice president of the Wall Street Journal.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to be here tonight, as always, at this dinner, to accept this award on behalf of Jimmy, present this award. Apologies for my voice, that's recovering from an illness, so I'm a little hoarse. But before I talk about Jimmy, I want to do a couple of things. First, let me congratulate all the Novak Fellows. For those of you who never met Bob Novak, he was really my hero as a journalist, and I had to compete against him, which was really dismaying on a weekly basis. My favorite Bob Novak story is there was once an official in Washington, a young fellow by the name of Jeff Bell, who Bob got on the phone and tried to interview Mr. Bell about some skullduggery, and Jeff said, well, I don't know, Mr. Novak, if I could talk to you. And Bob said in the phone, look, there are two kinds of people in Washington. There are sources and there are targets. And which do you want to be? That was Bob. I want to congratulate my colleague Bill McGurn on this well-deserved recognition. I admire a lot of things about Bill as a person and as a journalist, but I think the thing I most admire about his journalism is its humanity. He never forgets that government policies affect human beings, and you can see that in his columns. And I think nobody has done more to put the issue of Asian American admissions policies at Harvard on the national agenda and before the Supreme Court. And I have a feeling that pretty soon he's going to have one of his big victories on that front. I want to thank Roger Ream and the Fund for American Studies and the Rago family, Paul and Nancy and the whole family. You've been wonderful partners for us with the Rago Fellowship, which has, as Paul said, has been so terrific for us in identifying and bringing to us young, talented writers and editors, and they're fitting right in at the Journal and have made an enormous contribution. And I think Joe would be really proud of the program, even if he would cringe a little at any program named for Joe Rago, if you know Joe. he would have winced. So thank all of you here tonight who've contributed. We really appreciate it. It's making a difference, not just now, but I think it's going to make a difference for decades to come. Now, my main duty tonight is to talk about Jimmy Lai, and I'm so glad you got to see some of that video because it really captures some of his personality. Not all of it, but some of it. Let's just say that Jimmy told you what he thought, whether you liked it or not. One of his charming things. Of course, Jimmy couldn't be here tonight. He's in jail, confined to a jail cell in Hong Kong. On December 8th, he will be 74 years old. But China's communists have jailed him because they're afraid of him. He's a dangerous man. He's dangerous because of the example he sets with his courage on behalf of freedom. And he's dared to fight, no matter what the consequences. Now, those of us in the American press, we like to talk about speaking truth to power. It's a cliche, but believe me, it has currency in our profession. And we give ourselves credit for reporting on the rich and the powerful, but truth be told, we really have it easy. We're protected by American law. We're protected by the First Amendment. And it's great. It's a wonderful thing. I'm glad we have it. But we really don't have to suffer or take risks for what we do. In fact, we kind of award ourselves prizes all the time with a fair degree of self-congratulations, more than we deserve, I'm afraid. Jimmy Lai risked everything to speak democratic truth to communist power. That is real courage. Jimmy was born in 1948 in mainland China, just as the communist revolution was taking power. He and his two siblings had to fend for themselves. His mother had to be away from home at her job during the week. And Jimmy had to get a job early at age 10. He was working as a baggage carrier when somebody tipped him with a chocolate bar. Now, at that time in China, he thought a chocolate bar was a miracle, which it actually is. And he vowed to flee to find a place where you could find such things. At age 12, his mother arranged for smugglers to have him escape China, which was then enduring the madness of privation of communist equality. So Jimmy arrived in Hong Kong, where he worked in a sweatshop, earning the equivalent of $8 a month. He taught himself English, and by age 20, he was running the factory. A few years later, he founded his own clothing company, Giordano's, which he turned into a global chain of 2,000 stores in 30 countries. Now, Jimmy could have lived the life of a comfortable billionaire. But in 1989, he watched the massacre in Tiananmen Square, and he vowed that he would do something about it and preach the message of freedom to the people of Hong Kong and to China. He decided to start up Apple Daily and Next Media, and soon Apple Daily became wildly popular. In a city of 6 million, it had 500,000 subscribers. Jimmy first entered the Wall Street Journal orbit when Bill McGurn, then living in Hong Kong, recommended to editor Gordon Krovitz of the Far Eastern Economic Review, which is a sister publication of ours, should do a story on Jimmy and his clothing line. After the story appeared, Jimmy invited Gordon and Bill to lunch. And Gordon sent Bill a note in handwriting that when Bill read it, he thought that Jimmy had said he was the only person in Hong Kong who had read everything written by Friedrich Engels, as in the Engels of Karl Marx and the Communist Manifesto. Well, not exactly. What Jimmy had written is that he was the only man who had read everything by Friedrich Hayek. There's a difference. Jimmy Lai happens to be crazy about Hayek. He loves The Road to Serfdom, probably because he actually lived on that road and saw where it ended up. Now, Jimmy used Apple Daily and Next Media to promote democracy in Hong Kong and the autonomy that China had promised Hong Kong for 50 years. He and others succeeded so well that literally millions of Hong Kong's people, especially the young, started to fight for and vote for, when they had a chance, democracy in the city. But this was something that the Communist Party in Beijing could not allow. They saw it as a profound threat, which in a way it was, because it's the powerful idea. So they passed a national security law that became the excuse to arrest Jimmy and others who protested silently and spoke publicly in behalf of freedom. Now, Jimmy is an entrepreneur, and he believes in capitalism and freedom. I often hear these days, particularly on the political right, people talk about corporate media, and they think of that term as an epithet, as a term of derision. I think that's unfortunate. A corporation is merely a form of ownership. It has no particular points of view. What it does depends on who runs it, who owns it. It has no principles in and of itself. Corporate media can be good or bad. Jimmy ran a media corporation, just as my boss, Rupert Murdoch, runs a media corporation. And corporate media can be a great protector and a promoter of free and independent journalism, because it has the resources to defend itself against the depredations of government. That's why the Hong Kong government, which claims to protect private contracts, proceeded not only to arrest Jimmy and his editors, but to destroy Next Media and shut down Apple. You can read about this, by the way, and how they did it in tomorrow's Wall Street Journal, in a piece by Gordon Krovitz. The communists knew they had to destroy Jimmy's company as well as his publication. Now, as the communists were closing the vice on Hong Kong, Jimmy's many friends saw he was in danger and urged him to leave. He has a British passport. He could have taken his money and moved to the UK or perhaps somewhere else. Mark Simon, Jimmy's business partner for 20 years, Mark, who is here, tells the story of retired General Jack Keane, a friend, some of you know, telling Mark to tell Jimmy to leave. He told Mark to tell Jimmy that's an order from a general. Jimmy told Mark to tell Jack that just as Jack had felt a duty to fight for his country in Vietnam, Jimmy now felt that he had to stay and fight in Hong Kong, which had provided the freedom he needed to prosper. So he stayed. Eventually, he was arrested. He will no doubt be convicted, and he may spend the rest of his life in prison. Probably the only way he gets out is the intervention of the U.S. government, which is certainly what some of us who know and love Jimmy are praying for. Jimmy happens to be a man of faith, having converted to Catholicism late in life, and Bill McGurn was his sponsor and godfather. I think no doubt that faith helps sustain Jimmy in prison. But for those of us today who are free, those of us who are protected by the First Amendment, those of us who are lucky enough to have the platforms to be able to speak, our job is to keep Jimmy's story alive, to never let the world forget the unjust treatment he is suffering. Eventually, the communist government is going to fall. All tyrannies do, even if it takes somewhat longer than we all wish. And when the communists do fall, Jimmy Lai will be recognized as one of the heroes of Chinese freedom. Meanwhile, he serves, I think, for me, and I hope for all of us, as a model of courage and conviction, and for those of us at the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere who believe in free people and free markets. So it's a real honor for me to accept the Ken Tomlinson Award, and his son here is here as well. Is that true? Will is here? Yeah. Good. Is Mark Simon here? You want to come up and accept the award for Jimmy? Is he here? Oh, there he is. Okay.
And now to present the Thomas L.Phillips Career Achievement Award, please welcome political commentator and author Dana Perino.
Thank you very much. I'm certainly honored to be here, and Mr. and Mrs. Rago, thank you for all you've done. And I knew Joe just a little bit, and I really, I loved his writing, but I loved seeing him in the hallways a couple of times a week, and always getting a fist bump or something like that from him. It was a real joy. So thank you for that, and for his memory. I also want to thank, I have some White House people over here, and I have some Fox people over here. So my worlds are happily colliding tonight, but I really feel like I've made some new friends, and Roger, thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I have with me this letter that my assistant has wrapped up so tightly that I don't know if I'll be able to open it, but it's from George W. Bush, and I will read this at the end. For you, Bill. It is my distinct pleasure tonight to present the Thomas L. Phillips Career Achievement Award to my very good friend, Bill McGurn. The award was inaugurated in 1999 to recognize the accomplishments of a leader who has made major contributions to the field of journalism during a distinguished career. Thomas L. Phillips, the award's namesake, is a widely respected businessman, philanthropist, and patriot who founded Eagle Publishing. Among past recipients, William F. Buckley, whose name has been mentioned before, also Bob Novak, the famous Paul Gigot, the late Charles Krauthammer, John Stossel, Dan Henninger, and my colleague, Maria Bartiromo. Tonight, Bill joins this illustrious group in receiving this well-deserved, very well-deserved honor. Bill was born in Camp Pendleton, California, where his father was serving as a Marine. He spent most of his childhood in New Jersey before moving to South Bend, Indiana, to attend college at his beloved Notre Dame. There he majored in philosophy. That's what I should have majored in. I could argue with Gutfeld better. Organize my thoughts and think better. And those are skills that Bill put to frequent and brilliant use throughout his fascinating career. Many of you know Bill for his distinguished service as President Bush's chief speechwriter. But Bill has always been first and foremost, or as he prefers, a newspaper man. He began his career in Bloomington, Indiana. He's working for the American Spectator, and moved on to many other leading conservative publications in this country, including Washington Bureau Chief for National Review, and as editorial page editor for the New York Post. He spent more than a decade overseas, in Brussels for the Wall Street Journal Europe, and then Hong Kong, as we've just learned about, with both the Asian Wall Street Journal and the Far Eastern Economic Review. In Hong Kong, that's where he really saw firsthand how free markets could liberate billions of people from poverty, and that powerful observation always comes through in his writing today. As Paul was mentioning, the humanity is always there. And while living there, Bill and his lovely wife, Julie, who is here tonight, adopted 2 daughters from China, and they later returned to adopt a 3rd. And he also became a devoted friend of Jimmy Lai, who we also honor tonight, and as Paul said, became his godfather, something that Bill is very proud of and takes his responsibility in that role very seriously. In 2005, this is where I come on the scene, Bill joined the White House as President Bush's chief speechwriter. It would be fair to say that Bill was a very reluctant addition to the White House staff. When President Bush asked why he wanted the job, Bill told the truth. He didn't. That was not an answer given in many personnel interviews. But Bill's explanation typifies his character. He said that the country was at war and other people were making far greater sacrifices. So if he could be of service, he was willing to be drafted. And I'm so glad that he was. Over the next 3 years, Bill served the president and his country with exceptional dedication and skill. His work on the president's 2007 address to the nation announcing the troop surge in Iraq was a significant contribution to the success of that operation. And I'm just having flashbacks to how many times that speech was delayed and how many times it was rewritten. And Bill was our leader through that entire thing, and his colleagues there were all part of that incredible opportunity to reset the war. And as spectacular as Bill is as a writer, he was an even better colleague. So unlike many in Washington, he was not interested in burnishing his own reputation. He couldn't have cared less. He was a selfless mentor to many, some of whom are here tonight, especially the younger speechwriters on his team. And his Irish sense of humor helped lighten the mood in dark moments. One of my favorite memories of Bill is how he handled working on speeches where the president's economic policies were not fully aligned with his own views. As readers of his work know, Bill is deeply committed to the free market. So much that he had a bust in his office of Sir John Cowperthwaite. This is the free market financial secretary, sometimes called the Milton Friedman of Hong Kong. When Bill had to write speeches touting ethanol subsidies, he would get up from his desk, walk over to his bookshelf, and turn the Cowperthwaite bust around so that it would not have to watch what Bill was doing. In 2016, Bill rejoined the Wall Street Journal, his long-term home in journalism. He writes the Main Street column each Tuesday and serves on the editorial board. Bill is known for his reporting-based opinion writing. He believes his job is to speak the truth, especially when no one will. Some of the titles of his recent pieces give a glimpse of his common-sense look at important issues. A few examples are, Virginia's Culture War. It's getting ridiculous when Winsome Sears is called a face of white supremacy. It's the job of the American people, not the justices, to decide on abortion. Biden's inflation and the ghost of Milton Friedman, and let Jack Phillips bake cake. Some of the worst acts of intolerance are being done in the name of tolerance. And my personal favorite of late, Obama warned us about Joe. Finally, for all of his professional achievements, Bill's greatest pride comes from his family. Of those 3 baby girls that he and Julie adopted from orphanages in China, one became a star player on the Notre Dame women's rugby team. Another is studying at the University of Texas Southwestern to become a doctor. And the third is in college at Catholic University. Bill has written a lot of great stories in his career as a newspaperman, but that one is hard to top. Now let me see if I can wrest this George W. Bush letter out of this very protective packaging. I will not read it in his voice, though that would be really funny. All right. Laura and I send our greetings to everyone at the Fund for America Studies Journalism Awards dinner. We congratulate all of this year's honorees, and we particularly appreciate the opportunity to join you in honoring Bill McGurn's receipt of the prestigious Thomas L.Phillips Career Achievement Award. As you know, Bill was one of my principal White House speechwriters, where he fashioned some of my most important policy statements and policy addresses. Bill helped me in communicating with the American people and, indeed, the world. It was Bill who helped me develop the verb misunderestimate. And I'm finally ready to admit that it was Bill who helped me boldly declare, I know the human being and fish can coexist peacefully. However, he did not write, rarely is the question asked, is our children learning? I came up with that one myself. Bill was a treasured advisor and skilled wordsmith for me as president. Given his storied career before the White House and his work since at the New York Post, Wall Street Journal, News Corp, my view of the man will surprise no one who knows him. He is a brilliant writer, a deep thinker, valuable counselor, and wonderful human being. Most importantly, he is a loving husband to Julie and a proud father of 3 wonderful daughters. From his first days in opinion journalism as editor of the American Spectator to his work today as the journal's Main Street columnist, Bill McGurn has demonstrated that conservative ideas can be communicated with energy, directness, honesty, and conviction. His career shows young conservatives that a life of service and intellectual engagement can be rewarding, challenging, and fun. Congratulations, Bill. Laura joins me in sending our best wishes to you and your family. And now for what will surely be considered the most historic speech ever given in American history. At 9 p.m. on Tuesday, this November 16th, I give you Bill McGurn, the recipient of the Thomas L.Phillips Career Achievement Award.
Thank you. I know you've come to Mar-a-Lago for my big announcement. Oh, wait a minute. That's the other guy's speech. No, thank you, Dana. I feel a little like John Candy accepting an Oscar from Grace Kelly. What you said was so incredibly sweet. Dana and I, she said, go back to the Bush White House. Part of her job was to defend the speeches of my team. And after my stroke earlier this year, I've had no greater champion. So I'd like you now to help me show my appreciation for my good friend, the First Lady of Fox News, Dana Perino. I'd also like to thank Roger Green. No one does more to promote the virtues, I think we can speak of virtue in this room, necessary for a free society. As you have seen, he also does great work to keep Joe Rago's name alive. So please join me now in showing our appreciation for Roger and his merry band at the Fund for American Studies. Now, when I asked Roger what I should talk about, he was very clear, about 2 minutes. That's good advice. So I will not bore you with stories about my career. This doesn't mean I won't still bore you. But I want to talk about journalism in the context of another name you just heard, Jimmy Lai. He soon goes on trial on national security charges, and we know the outcome. Rupert Murdoch once told me that, at its best, a newspaper is the one thing a good man can rely on when everything else is stacked against him. This is personal for me, because Jimmy is not only a fellow newsman, but my godson. And my wife, Julie, was given a taste of his treatment when she was detained earlier this month by authorities in Hong Kong's airport when she tried to visit Jimmy and his wife, Teresa. At a time when so many other friends and associates are running away from Jimmy, the Wall Street Journal editorial page has never wavered in its support for this brave man and what he stands for. It'd be so simple to forget Jimmy and make life easier for all of us. It wouldn't even require denouncing him. It'd be enough to pull our punches and to do it in a way that few outsiders would even notice. But the only thing Paul Jagot asks for from his newsmen is a little prudence. And by newsman prudence, of course, Paul means the wisdom to know when it's the right time, throw the first punch. That, my friends, is the way an editorial page speaks. I count myself lucky to be along for the ride. And Paul is the one who has to deal with the veiled threats and complaints from people warning the journal not to rock the China boogie. I've already gone on too long. So I want to end by again thanking Roger Ream and Dana Perino for this night, and Paul Jago and Rupert Murdoch for the opportunity of a lifetime. And to my highly talented younger colleagues here and the Novak Fellows, whenever you doubt if what you do makes a difference, just remember there's an innocent man sitting in a Hong Kong prison who would tell you what a godsend having a brave and principled newspaper by his side can be. Good night, God bless.
In the last 60 seconds before we depart, I want to just again stress the importance of one word, and that is courage. When the Fund for American Studies and its Board of Trustees reviewed our mission statement, the mission statement we've used basically since 1967 when we were founded, we made one change last year. It had said that our mission is to develop leaders. But we put in front of the word leaders, courageous leaders. Because to be a leader today in this world, in this environment, requires courage. Tonight we heard about examples of that. Joe Rago was courageous as a student at Dartmouth in conservative journalism and as a writer for the Wall Street Journal. Bill McGurn is a man of courage and virtue. And Jimmy Lai, of course, has courage beyond our imagination to do what he is doing in Hong Kong, as you heard from Paul Jago. So I hope that in the coming months, you will generously support the Fund for American Studies and support these young people you saw tonight in the Novak program, our Joseph Rago Fellow. With more funds, we can have more fellows. We'll shorten the program, don't worry. We won't bring up 20 people next year. But we can make sure there are more young journalists who have an opportunity to make careers in journalism. When you are a Joe Rago Fellow, you're inspired to make journalism your career because you get the kind of colleagues they have at the Wall Street Journal editorial pages. Novak Fellows have the opportunity to write stories and write books. We've had over 70 books published by Novak Fellows in the time we've had that program. So please support us. There's a QR code. You saw the names of sponsors of this dinner scrolling during dinner. Anyone who gives, starting right now, will see their names scroll next year. So thank you for your support. We look forward to seeing you next year. Good night.